Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and I'm joined by a guest co-host today, Miss Christina Vehar. Hello, friend.
Hi, friend.
I'm so excited to bring you on this special episode where we're bringing back Arreon Harley-Emerson, and he's talking about his work with Equity Sings, but more importantly, diving deep into some work that Christina is doing for her master's project. What are you most excited for in this conversation, Christina?
In this conversation, I'm just so excited to hear more about Arreon's vision for Equity Sings, and specifically for my project, selfishly, to hear more about ADEIBR.
Awesome. Well, this episode is brought to you by our friends over on the Patreon page. Check it out, patreon.com/musicedmatters. And really, that's all we need for now. I mean, I guess you can share, all those things that helps people hear the podcast, but it's all about figuring out how we can make it more accessible so that things can be more diverse, so that it is equitable and inclusive and people feel that they belong. And then we'll talk about restorative practices. But that's enough of me. Let's listen to Arreon Harley-Emerson and his work with Equity Sings. Today on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we have an awesome returning guest, Mr. Arreon Harley-Emerson, and a co-host, whoop whoop, Miss Christina Vehar, also returning to the show. Hey guys!
Hi.
This is I've been looking forward to this for all week. I'm stoked. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for having us.
I'm excited.
So this is going to be a slightly different format. We're going to ask all the questions about Equity Sings and all these new adventures happening in your life. And then we're going to flip the script and see how one of your ADEIBR conversations might look if you were doing a session with someone that is out in the choral classroom or music classroom right now. So that's kind of the flow of it. But we've had you on the show back in episode 92, but will you give us a little short version? How did you find Music World, and what is Equity Sings?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, so my journey began as a kid. I can't actually remember a time where I wasn't singing. So I started out singing because I went to church. I was dragged to church every Sunday, and everybody in Black church sings. That's just it. It's really that simple. I did that kind of, church choir experience. When I was 7, a music teacher of mine, Mr. McCoy, shout out to Mr. McCoy, wherever you are, was like, oh, you should join the select choir, because, when you have general music, usually the choir starts at grade 4 and 5. We had that kind of model. And so he was like, you should, join the select choir, even though you're not, of age. And then he was like, oh, you're really good at this. And he sent a letter home to my mom that was like, you should audition for this wonderful choir. It was the Peabody Conservatory's children's course conducted by Doreen Falvey. She's still there. She's been there for, oh my God, I guess over 30 years at this point. But that really was the beginning. And that program was really transformative for me in many, many, many ways. In addition to the choir experience, I then started, studying voice privately, piano privately, all those sorts of things like that. And that kind of just set me on this path for music. And I was just really, I thought it was just the best thing in the world. And it was great because I always had two totally different informative experiences that were happening musically. So I had this experience that was happening at the church at the same time as I was having this formative experience that was happening and this more traditional Western experience. And so I think that it allowed me to be bilingual in these idioms. And so I think that has been probably one of the things that has served me really well. Went on to college, thought I was not going to do music for a while. I was going to be a creative writing major. And then there was a scholarship for a company, and so I did it. And then I was a minor, and then I was a major, then I was a double major. But my undergraduate degrees were in vocal performance and music theory and composition. So a lot of folks don't know that. I'm a big theory nerd, and I do a lot of composition. And then my master's is in voice and choral conducting. I did that at University of Delaware. My undergrad was at Goucher College. Did grad work, University of Delaware. Studied with Paul Head. Studied with for choral conducting and voice with Noelle Archambault. She's also a choral conductor as well. She's worked at some HSIs, HBCUs, and she's also still at the University of Delaware. And then, I was teaching, I taught in the School District of Philadelphia, loved that. Obviously, I was at the choir school for a very long time. That was a decade tenure. Started at Temple, doing a doctorate degree there. So that will be PhD loading. That will be done soon. And then really this latest venture of Equity Sings, which got started in 2015. So Equity Sings, basically a friend was like, you should start like an actual real company. And the reason why I did that was because I was doing a lot of speaking, guest conducting. I did a TED Talk in 2015 that was about choir, about gangs in choir. And so what I was studying at that time was understanding how gangs function. And I used as a framework Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when we take a look at how gangs operate, they really just start at the bottom of the pyramid and go up. And I was like, hey, that's very similar to choir. Choirs and gangs are actually very similar social structures in many ways. And so that kind of got picked up. And then I got a lot of phone calls, a lot of folks asking, how can I use some of these principles about community building and diversity, equity, inclusion into my own community. And that was really the birth of Equity Sings in 2015. Since then, it's just continued to grow. So now we have worked with this right now. I just finished client or organization number 73, which is insane. It's insane. So it's crazy, scaling things up. Just brought on board a new project manager. So it's like really, it just has been huge. Some big announcements coming up with some folks who are going to be joining Equity Sings to be doing some workshops and things like that. So you'll see some announcements happening next month in February. Well, I guess you'll see them in February. And through March, there'll be some pretty big announcements that are happening.
Sweet.
With some work that is happening and some new things that we're going to be offering. But what we do is we really are an ADEI consultancy at heart. We do a lot of other things as well. So we'll do strategic planning, particularly for nonprofit arts and culture organizations. That's a big piece of who I am from my nonprofit days. But the vast majority is centered around ADI. Everything we do is using this ADI lens. So you would only come to really Equity Sings if you're really looking to improve in that area. And it might be that you're doing a standalone ADI plan, or you're doing a diversity plan, or you might be wanting to, we've done searches, we've done for executive directors, artistic directors, all the above. We have done fundraising consults for folks who are looking to, how do I fundraise for these projects? Because we all want to do this work, but this work ain't cheap. That's one of the things I tell people. Creating access requires financial resources in addition to time resources. So we help and in those spaces, supporting them in those ways. And it's really been a pleasure to be able to do that. I took the plunge to just kind of focus in on this and to build this and scale this and to be able to give it the water that it needs to grow. So it's been quite a journey, but very exciting.
I love that it all stems from you saw choir replicated and matching that whole Maslow gang mentality. And now that has just snowballed. And the focus, the heart of all of this with what you just said is community building.
Yes. Yeah.
So as you're building your community around Equity Sings, you've mentioned you've brought on a project manager, you're about to make some big announcements. What are some of the types of projects you've mentioned? Professional development, you mentioned going in and helping with searches. For the listeners who are listening right now, what are ways that they could use the resources you have on your social media, like those little sermons you do that are so good, or some of the other things? What are things they could tap into as everyday teachers?
So as far as everyday teachers, yes, professional development. We do a lot of professional development sessions. A lot of we go in and we do a lot of how do I do music of the Black diaspora without appropriating, and how do I understand the performance practice? And so really having immersive experiences, professional development also, and culturally sustaining practices. There are all these terms: culturally relevant, culturally sustaining, culturally responsive. I advocate for a bit of a new framework that I call the emancipatory choral education, which is a little bit taking from some of the James Banks's kind of framework on his approaches to multiculturalism, but it's much more relevant, and it has ideas of anti-oppression, anti-racism, as well as some Geneva Gay, Latz, and Billings, and just some other sort of community building things that are also necessary in these spaces. So a lot of professional development in that way. If you go online, we have a lot of social media things. Like we try to share articles that are cross industry. So though the majority of organizations have been music organizations, it's not been exclusively music organizations who we have supported. So we talk about what are some best HR practices. That's a big thing, particularly for community choirs, because generally you're a small organization, you don't have an HR person who is working for you. We also will do culture assessments. So this is something that we've done with a number of higher ed institutions. So folks who are looking to use actual instruments that can benchmark where you are, so that you can have both quantitative and qualitative measures of your ADEI journey and your growth. So these tools are not meant to be like, we have arrived, but they are meant to be able to help you understand where you are in your own journey. And so we do a lot of those types of organizational assessments. And we also do a lot of damage control, quite frankly. So like a lot of like crises. So like, institution might have had an incident that someone said X was racist or Y was racist. So we come in, basically we're using restorative practice as a frame, conflict resolution as a frame, and we're talking about how do we bring about some healing in this space that we have there. So a lot of facilitation as well is part of what we do. So yeah, so it's a lot exciting. Of kind of, but there's a clear like the yes. At the core is this ADEIB. So it's like, if you want to do these things, strategic planning is important, fundraising is important, professional development is important. All these things are really important pieces, but how do we do that using that ADEIBR lens is really kind of where we are in our work.
It's exciting to hear, because when you were on the show back in episode 92, which I have recommended that show to hundreds of conversations, because it became such a vital framework in everything that we do. My students listen to it as part of their syllabi for one of the methods classes and create their own, how they're going to view their curriculum through that lens. Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. But what I also want to know is, as you've taken this plunge, what are you most excited? Because it sounds like your projects are really getting clarified now that you're not working full-time at the Delaware School. So tell us about that, because it's always scary to take that plunge.
It is crazy. So one of the big things that I'm working on right now is a partnership with Course America. It's called the Choral Executive Leadership Academy. CELA is another thing that I call it. So this is the first ever of its kind. It's based off of a leadership development program called Leaders of Promise that I ran for nonprofit executives in Delaware. But the SELA program, which is a partnership between Equity Sings and Course America, we are having a cohort of 30 BIPOC persons who are interested in admin and choral executive leadership. These might be choral conductors who are also serving in an administrative capacity. It might be individuals who are just administrators and are not choral conductors or music teachers as a background. But the objective is to have a program that is asset-based and not deficit-based. So it's not like one of those programs that's like, oh, you don't know anything about budgeting. Let me make you a better leader. The premise is that they're already coming to us as leaders, but these leaders, due to systemic and engineered othering and marginalization, that they have not necessarily had the same opportunities to be able to exercise their leadership potential. And so that's what we're looking to do, is to be able to, again, use their strengths, use their lived experiences in this program. So yes, there will be some tactical and technical elements of it, such as budgeting, as I mentioned before, but it's really about how do we amass social capital? And that's something that's really uncomfortable for us to talk about. So social capital is like, it's not what you know, but who you know, right? And so who you know is equally important if you want to be a successful executive, not just in choir or music, but in any job or professional situation. It's really important to have these professional networks. But what we see in communities of color is that the networks are not able to provide the same level of access into C-suite positions or executive positions or to these managerial positions. So this is what this is all about. So what we are doing is doing some training to get people, one, comfortable dealing with managing PWIs, predominantly white institutions. We are working to ensure that there are a whole bunch of other skills, such as managing a board, because that is something that's really important. You have to know how to manage a board if you want to be a choral executive, nonprofit governance, human resource domains. But they are also being mentored by a lot of BIPOC choral leaders in our field. So folks like Rollo Dilworth, folks like Deanna Sias, folks who are going to be able to provide that social capital that's necessary to be able to be successful in the choral ecosystem.
This sounds awesome. And it makes complete sense now while you are going in this direction. I mean, I'm just excited to be talking about how it's grown since, we talked a year and a half ago, maybe, or a year ago.
Yeah. So that program is my baby, and I'm really excited about it. And so applications are currently open through March 1st. And I look forward to answering any questions anyone has. If they would like to apply to be a part of that program, you can go to the Course America website and see all of our fabulous mentors. It's just like a great list of just wonderful people. Eugene Rogers, Penelope Cruz, it's just great. It's just so awesome to have all these folks who are on board. The other big project that I'm working, there's a lot of big ones, but that I can tell you about definitively at this moment. And I can give you all the tea on is Bent But Not Broken is happening. So the first Bent But Not Broken conference was in April 2022. It was actually supposed to be in 2021, but the pandemic pushed it off. So it will be an every other year conference. Thus, it is happening in 23. So the dates of that are November 8th through November 11th. After ACDA there's going to be some programming. It'll get kicked off first with an affinity group program for Black choral directors. And that will be the beginning of a slow drip about the lineup for this year's conference. But what I can tell you is it's going to be #epic. I just didn't think that we could outdo the last Bent But Not Broken. But this year's conference is going to it's like, I literally can't. I just can't. Like, I just can't. It's going to be really great. We've got some really wonderful scholars, and there's such a huge diversity. Even though we're talking about the music of Black choral composers and Black scholarship and theoretical frameworks for music education and approaching music teaching, there is a huge diversity in what's going to be offered for that. So definitely be on the lookout. I'm going to Delaware on your calendar for November 8th through 11th, 2023. It's going to be wonderful. Lots of great performances, lots of great workshops, and intercessions that you definitely want to be a part of. And so mark a calendar.
Yeah, I will put both of those links for the application for the CELA. What do you call it?
So CELA, the Choral
CELA.
Executive Leadership Academy. CELA.
CELA.
I know.
I will link that, and I'll link Bent but Not Broken. That's so cool.
Sounds good.
Okay, so it is exciting to hear all that you're doing. And here's where we're going to kind of change up the typical podcast format. Christina Vehar, I'm going to turn it over to you. I want you to explain this awesome master's project that you're working on and ask some questions that we can hear, because I also am super excited about the resource you're compiling, because everything we're hearing takes work. It takes time. Like you said, it doesn't just take time equity, it takes financial equity to get there. So Christina, I'm passing it off to you. And this way we get to kind of experience what it is like to be counseled by Equity Sings.
Yeah, I was so excited. Thank you, Emmy. And thank you, Arreon, too. So part of my work as a graduate student is to create some sort of final master's project. We don't necessarily call it a thesis, but it can be anything that we can create on any topic that we're interested in. And actually, episode 92 with Arreon was what inspired my whole idea for my project.
That's so cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I loved that episode and learned so much. And I became just so interested in Arreon's work on ADEIBR and how more people need to know about this, because not a lot of it's getting out there. But I realized that the more I said that acronym, the more people were like, wait, huh? So I was like, I want to, promote this work and learn more about it. And so that's when I reached out to Arreon, did an interview with him, talked to him about my project, because ultimately I want to create a resource book, for lack of a better word, with my project, where I have a literature review and interviews with experts, and then have a facilitation guide at the end to walk people through their biases and their mindsets, and then use that to propel their work going forward with ADEIBR. So anyways, one of the questions that I asked Arreon right away was what you called it synthesizing the acronym. So what really inspired that addition of that R and that restoration? And if you could just go into that further a little bit for people that don't necessarily know that entire acronym.
Yeah, so for those who, there are so many acronyms. There's DEI, DEIB. Some people use JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, all of these things. But ADEI is a kind of the way to go if you want to be successful. Why do I say that? Well, because the research literature tells us that we need to begin with access. So without access, there's not a lot that we can do. So that is a great place to begin. That is the place to begin in your journal, in your journey. Without access, you obviously won't have diversity. So that's why A becomes for the D. And then E is equity. Equity means that we are distributing or redistributing resources so that there can be an equal outcome. It's not about equal resources, it's about equal outcome. So it's about redistributing those amongst those from diverse domains. And so if you don't have diversity, then you cannot practice equity. So a lot of folks I see are we're an equitable organization, we're an equity-focused organization. If the presence of diversity is not there, then you might have equity on paper, but you are not practicing the tenets of equity. So that's really important to be able to differentiate that. Then we've got inclusion. So inclusion means that because you have these equitable processes in place and you have these diverse persons and you have this access, all of that, that you're able to include the perspectives and the lived experiences of others into your decision-making, to your work, to your community, et cetera. Fill in the blank. And when that happens, your community begins to grow closer to one another and they grow closer to the work. And as they do so, there is a culture of belonging that is facilitated. And then from that belonging, after that is the R. The R I always put in a different color when I show it because it's something that's continually happening. It's restorative practice. And restorative practice has been around for a long time. A lot of people heard about it in schools, restorative justice in our schools, restorative circles, these things. But it is something that we see in Indigenous and African cultures. It is, and specifically Maori culture. This was a core tenet of how societies were functioning. But basically, in this restorative practice, we acknowledge that there are problems, we address them, and then we redress them. So it's about rebuilding those communities. It's about putting trust into the trust bank. And then the interest grows on that trust. And that's when we begin to be able to take action to repair harm. And so there is a understanding that the harm is very real and that it is needing actions that are actually going to repair them. So, but the reason why that acronym is important because it is sequential. So JEDI is not sequential. There's nothing wrong. If you have a JEDI committee, I'm not saying disband the JEDI committee. What I am saying is justice is an outcome. And so you cannot begin with the J, right? And so that is why this acronym is really important. And I think it is important that we think through this more strategically and more sequentially if we want to be successful in what we're doing. And I also want to note that it's a spiral. Soon as we get to that ADEIBR, then we go to another level of ADEIBR. And so it's a spiral that is continually happening because we can always do better.
Yeah, thank you so much for just explaining that and going into that further. And that was something that I learned so much in my interview with you too. So I appreciate that. I know also that you talked about some of like the resources and the services that Equity Sings can provide towards the beginning of our conversation. But if you were to tell other people what your like main vision for Equity Sings is and how others could support that vision, what would it be?
I think that the main vision for Equity Sings is, I always think of when I think about my work at Equity Sings, I think about Maya Angelou. It's like when you know better, you have to do better. And so that's what I think is the main vision, is one, educating people and then giving people the support and resources that they need to actually do better. There are so many places, people ask like, what do you do? What is your job title? And I'm like, yeah, I know I'm like the president and CEO, but like, I always like in writing refer to these kind of folks who are out there, these practitioners, as equity coaches. And the reason why I call folks equity coaches is because it acknowledges that just like every athlete needs to be supported by their coach differently, each organization, each teacher, each person needs to be supported by an ADEI practitioner in a different way that is supporting the needs that they have, because no communities are the same. Therefore, one cannot just prescribe the same, regimen for everyone. And that's what a coach is. A coach is going to take a look at your form and they're going to stay with you over time because they realize that that change is progressive and that change takes time. And so I think that's what the overall kind of vision is for it, for Equity Sings. And 20 years from now, what I want it to be is this dynamic organization that where people go to for resources because they want to do better. And that they want to have ongoing experiences. One day you'll be able to go to Equity Sings and you'll see lots of faces there, and you're like, guess what? I need help in conducting spirituals, and you'll be able to be connected with the person who will be able to help you with that. Or we need a professional development session on how do we contextualize singing music from South Africa and apartheid, and how do I really grapple with that and teach this in a culturally responsive and responsible way in my classroom. And then you can be connected with a coach who can help you with that. And so that's what the long-term vision of Equity Sings is.
That's so exciting. How can we support you? We're sharing the vision. We're telling people about Equity Sings. What else can we do to support you in this incredible work?
Well, what I would say is go to the website, join the mailing list, keep up with what we're doing. We'd be happy to be in contact with you about whether doing a workshop. Yes, I always love saying, like, it's great, and guest conducting is joy and something that I love doing. But I also really love those opportunities to just go in and workshop, like with choirs, and to work not just with the choirs and the students, but also with educators, to be able to say, like, actually, how are we going to do this? How do we design that curriculum? How do we integrate? How do we differentiate? And I think, I don't know, I get so much joy from that with working through those Rubik's Cubes. So if that's something that you're interested in, give us a call. We'd love to come out. We love collaborating with other folks throughout the choral ecosystem. You can support programs such as the SELA program, the Choral Executive Leadership Academy program, where you can refer BIPOC folks who can go through this program. You can come out to Bent But Not Broken and see that incredible conference and take part of that experience. But more than anything, what I hope is that that people decide to do one thing today better than they did yesterday. And it's really that simple. Like, what I would get overwhelmed cleaning my room as a kid. And my mom was like, well, you just have to pick up one thing and then decide to pick up another. And that's really not an oversimplification for our journeys as professionals. We have to make the choice to start somewhere and pick up one thing and then decide to do it one more time. And so I think that's kind of one of the best ways that you can support the work that's going on. I always say another thing you can do is to tell people about ADEIBR. I think the more that we can all get on the same page with that acronym, the more that we can be unified in our work that we're doing across the country. And I think it helps us to be more strategic about our diversity initiatives.
Sequentially and as a spiral.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
So awesome. Okay. We have end of show questions to kind of tie it all together, which is kind of fun because the end of show questions came about because these were things that would always come up in conversation, and we just wanted to put it in one place. So what book are you reading right now, or what's the best book you've read, a book that you would like to recommend to the listeners?
A book that I have to recommend. God, that is so hard. Right now, I'm reading a lot of textbooks. So,
yeah, when's the PhD done?
Where my mind is in 20, it might be 24. Like, I'm ahead of schedule.
Good job.
Very ahead of schedule. Very ahead, which is great. But what I will say is one book that is always on my mind is a one called I am deeply interested in Black liberation theology, which is, to me, the most important framework if you're going to conduct spirituals or do gospel. I think it is a must to know that work. And one of the leading scholars in Black liberation theology is James Cone. He's written a number of books that I would recommend. One is called Black Liberation Theology and Black Power, or Black Theology and Black Power. Another is called The Cross and the Lynching Tree, which talks about a lot of the racial implications of the crucifixion and kind of the symbology that is mirrored also in the Black experience, particularly in enslavement and disenfranchisement of Black people in the United States. And then there's the kind of the big book is called A Black Theology of Liberation. And that was when he was really first talking about Black liberation theology. That book's 1970 is when it was published, but it feels like it was just written like yesterday. But it's deeply important. I do believe, well, certainly if I have anything to do with it, it will be, Cone will become required readings like Grout's or Dennis Schrock, because it is that critical to being able to authentically and fully understand what kind of spirituals and gospel are about. It is a fabulous framework. It is not an indoctrination in Christianity, but it's very clear about how these idioms develops, and it's really, really important. And I think it is something that I foresee being a real game changer
Awesome.
for choral conductors.
James Cone, A Black Theology of Liberation. I'll put that in the notes.
So good.
3 questions left. Who is really mattering to you right now? Who is someone that you would love to give a shout out to?
Oh my gosh.
Hardest thing ever.
So people who I just have to give like some just like shout outs to. One is probably Penelope Cruz. Penelope Cruz is she ain't no joke, man. She don't play games, and she is in it to win it. And I am so incredibly appreciative of her advocacy throughout the choral ecosystem. Another person I would say who I'm really just grateful for what they're doing throughout the choral ecosystem is, of course, Ronald Dilworth, my mentor and teacher. He's the absolute best. The man is absolutely brilliant. And I think just what he is doing is wonderful. I think that most people have not even had the opportunity to scratch the surface of depth that is there. The repertoire is great. Keep buying it, keep singing it, keep doing it. But when people begin to unpack his process and the curriculums that he writes, like today, there's a piece on NPR, on our local affiliate in Philadelphia on WHYY, where he wrote Opera Philadelphia, a social justice curriculum to go with Margaret Bonds' Credo. The man is incredible. So definitely a huge shout out there. And then I want to shout out as well, Jace Sapon. Jace Sapon is doing the thing. So they are just killing it right now. Unapologetically talking about the need for justice and inclusion, unapologetically themselves and authentic, just incredibly, just doing great work. I'm telling you, anything that Jace does is really fantastic. If you do not know the name Dr. Jace Sapon, look up Jace's work and you will just, it is just so inspirational and so needed in our ecosystem.
So maybe you can connect me to all 3 and we'll ask him to come on the podcast.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure they would.
That would be so
we
fun.
Will do
all
that.
3 of them would be fantastic interviews. We'll touch base after we record. Last 2 questions.
I'm sure we can get it.
I hope so. This one's going to be really easy because I think we've done this the whole episode. What is an organization that you really feel matters right now? And I'm pretty sure you're going to say Equity Sings.
There are so many organizations that matter right now. Yes, I think Equity Sings is among one of many organizations that I think really are doing incredible work. But I'm going to talk about a different organization at the present moment, because I just think that what they're doing is fantastic. Well, I'll give you two. One is musical, one is not. One is tonality. And tonality, if you do not know tonality, look them up. It's choir. They're out on the West Coast. I was like, the other coast, what do we call it? The West Coast. And they are really what I don't even know how to describe what they're doing. They're doing choral experiences that are really talking to relevant social issues of today. And that is conducted by Dr. Alexander Lloyd Blake. He is absolutely brilliant. They have had so many incredible works. They had an album that came out, I think it was called America Will Be, that came out maybe a year and a half ago. At this point, time is going by so quickly post-pandemic. It might have been 2021, maybe that album came out. So maybe it's 2 years at this point. But definitely look up tonality. And then the other organization that is not music related at all, that I think that we would be crazy if we did not acknowledge the impact that they have had in the last decade, is Black Lives Matter. BLM is unreal. That organization, the infrastructure of it is really grown in such an incredible way over time, but it is still at its root a grassroots Black organization, which is really, I think, absolutely incredible. So I think that the work that they're doing is, just the community organizing and taking to the streets that have happened in recent times is really due to their incredible work. And we would not be having this conversation today without their advocacy.
Those are awesome. I have both of them on the list. All right, ready for the last question? Yeah. What's the one thing you want the listener to walk away from this episode with? The one thing that matters?
The one thing that I would say that matters is, one, let's get this acronym right, y'all. Like ADEIBR. Like, just trust me on this. Trust the research literature on this. And then the other thing that I want people to understand is that the work ain't easy. It is not easy. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it and everybody would do it successfully. So there are a lot of folks who get discouraged about the work and feel like, am I the right person? Am I not worthy? Am I an imposter? Like, all of these things that are out there. But it takes everybody to be able to really make systemic change. And that's what we're talking about here. And so everyone needs to contribute to this work. I always like to say, there's that great MLK quote that the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But it's going to take a lot of hands to bend that, right? And so I think it's really important that we're all active participants in this.
I'm ready to get my hands dirty. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your awesome research. Christina, thanks for coming on and being a part of this fun little mix-up.
Yes, thanks, Christina.
Yay. All right. I will see you guys next time.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, this is the best outro ever. I always say, what did you learn today? And there's someone to answer the question. What did you learn today, Christina?
Well, I learned all about Equity Sings and the amazing resources and services that they can provide, and how important the ADEIBR acronym is specifically, not only in that order, but that it's a spiral, and so that the work is always continuing.
You totally stole mine. We are both using that for sequential purposes and for spiraling purposes. Hey, it was so fun to do this with you. Thank you for being here.
It was so fun to do this with you too. Thank you for having me.
Well, we always end the show with the same thing. In case no one has told you today, you matter. We all know that music matters, especially the work of Equity Sings, everyone else who's putting their hands in there and getting it dirty, and the acronym, as he says, get it right, y'all, ADEIBR. And I'll see you next time on the Music Ed Matters podcast.